Good morning, church. How are you? Woo! You sounded good this morning. We're practicing. I want to remind you, we're practicing for next week, man. I pray that you come with your praise on. You come clapping and celebrating, because there is a community out there that need what we have. They need some hope. They need some joy, and we've got it in spades here, and let's share it with them. Amen? Amen. Amen. Welcome. My name is Troy, and I'm one of the pastors here, and it's great to have you all join us this morning. I'm with Sean. We are resurrection people. I mean, we're not church people. We're not Bible thumper people. We are resurrection people. Those two things wouldn't exist if the resurrection didn't happen. I mean, we believe in an event that Jesus raised from the dead, that tomb is empty. I've been to Jerusalem. I've been to where that grave was, and it is a garden now, as the song said. It is empty. There's no body. Nobody is in that tomb, and that's what gives us hope. That's what gives us joy. That's why we can smile, even though things might be tough for us. We have hope, and we need to share it with our community. I pray that you do that this next week. But glad to have you. Welcome. Are you enjoying summer? In Steamboat. That's a bad joke. Everybody's like, when are you going to bring out the flip-flops? I'm like, when winter is over. That was about a month ago, apparently. So anyway, but glad that you're here. Glad to have you. Today, I'm excited because we are celebrating Palm Sunday, which is when we celebrate the triumphant entry of Jesus into Jerusalem as he was welcomed into the city as their new king. That kind of set off all the events that we're going to be celebrating next week. And so we're doing that. And to do that, we are going to celebrate communion together. You might remember that Jesus, the night before he was arrested, had the supper, and he told us to remember him and to remember what he did and what he did for us. And so we're going to be doing that together at the end of our service. And so I just want to give you a chance to prepare your hearts for that. And so I want to just start out by just making a statement, and I think that you would agree with me. I believe this, that at one point or another in all of our lives, I mean everyone. This isn't a Christian thing or a believer thing. This is a human being thing. I believe that at one point or another in all of our lives, we have all asked ourselves this question right here. Why would a good God allow bad things to happen? I think, or some version of that we've all at some point went, why, if you're good, would you let this happen? And we might add, to me, because that's usually when we ask this. Why is this happening to me? If you're so good, you're so wonderful, why would you allow this to happen in our life? It's a universal question. I think a lot of our friends and neighbors have asked this question. In fact, when some people ask this question, it marks the end or the beginning of the end of their faith. They're on their way out because they're like, this isn't right. I don't understand it. In fact, you might be here today and your faith might be dying a slow death because something bad happened to you this last year. Something bad happened to you, or maybe someone you love, you watch them go through that, and you can't wrap your mind around a God that would allow such bad things to happen in this world. And I'm not throwing stones at you. I totally get why you might feel that way. I get it. I've had the same thoughts, but here's something that I've noticed, and it's interesting. I've noticed that whenever we think about the bad things in this world, isn't it true that we often focus on the things that are out there and ignore the things that are actually in here? Right? When we think about bad things, we're always thinking about what's happening out there in the world, but we never think about the bad things that are happening right in here. I mean, think about this. Let me just take a poll and see who's here this morning. I'm going to ask you to raise your hand in a second if this is true. Has anyone here ever done anything bad before? Raise your hand if that's... Oh, a lot of bad in this room, right? Me too. We all have done something bad. But here's the thing. It's interesting when people ask the question, why would a good God allow bad things to happen? I've never once heard anyone ask, why would a good God allow me to happen? All right? No one ever says that, right? I mean, if God is good and I am bad, then why would he allow me to happen if he's a good God? My point is that I'm just trying to make that most of us have no problem holding God accountable for the evil that happens out there, but we ignore the evil that comes from right in here. And here's the problem with that. The way this kind of thinking, that kind of thinking leads to what is called an unfalsifiable premise. That's a big word for a Moffat County High School graduate, big phrase there. An unfalsifiable premise is basically an argument that is nonsensical. That you're just kind of throwing an argument out there that doesn't really make sense. In other words, if you follow this argument that we're making to its logical conclusion, you will end up with something that doesn't make sense, that is nonsensical. For example, for some people, someone might say, you may talk to them. They're like, yeah, I can't believe in the existence of a good God who allows bad things to happen in this world. But then they think about it and they're like, but wait a second, oh my gosh. I cause bad things to happen. Oh my gosh, maybe I can't believe a good God exists because I exist, right? I mean, they've canceled themselves out. It's nonsensical. They're like, you know what? The only way you'll ever convince me that a good God exists is for you to convince me that I don't exist. Which, again, doesn't make sense. And they're like, so what are we talking about here? I don't know. It might as well ask some dumb other question like, how much wood can a woodchuck chuck if a woodchuck could chuck wood? I don't know the answer, neither do you, because it doesn't make sense. This is circular reasoning. It's nonsensical. And so I say that because I believe that if John, the same John that followed Jesus, the Apostle John who followed Jesus and saw everything that Jesus did and heard everything that Jesus taught, and then he later in his life wrote down everything he saw, and we have now the Gospel of John. I believe if that John was here today and he heard our question about how could a good God allow evil to exist in his world, I think John would say, hey, wait a second. I saw something that might be able to help you answer that question. I saw something with my eyes. I saw God in a human body. I saw the creator of the universe come down to this earth in a human body. His name was Jesus, and he was good. I mean, he was more than good. He was amazing. But here's the thing. He lived in this evil world with all these evil people. He coexisted with them. And when I say evil, I mean the kind of evil that you can barely imagine. And here's the thing. And Jesus did not automatically eliminate and wipe out all those evil people. He didn't do that. Instead, he did something interesting. He loved them. He didn't get rid of the evil. He loved those evil people, and he forgave those people, and he loved me, John would say, and he forgave me, and his love eliminated a lot of the evil that was inside of me, and subsequently eliminated some of the evil that's in this world. And I think John would say this to us. I think he would say, I saw a good God, and I saw evil people coexist. I saw that good God in this broken and evil world, and I saw that happen. But here's the thing. The way it worked out was like nothing you would imagine. And so today we are in part 5 of this series that we've been in called Proof. We're looking at what we believe is proof that proves that Jesus was who Jesus said he was. And we've been following John as he followed Jesus in his life. And in his later years, John was encouraged by a friend that he should write down what he saw, that he should write down his account of those 3 years that he followed and was with Jesus. And so in John's gospel, we've been going through this, we're realizing that John isn't just telling us what happened. He's telling us why. He's telling you why it happened. In fact, John is saying, listen, I have an agenda. I wrote this. I'm writing this because I want you to believe what I believe. John is saying, I want everyone that reads this to believe what I believe. He says this in John chapter 20. He says, but I have written these things so that you may believe that Jesus is the long-awaited Messiah of the nation of Israel, and that he is the Son of God, that he is God in a bod, and that by believing in him, you will have life. You will have an extraordinary life. You will have peace. You will have joy in your hearts. You will live a wonderful life in his name. And so in John's gospel, as we've been reading it, you'll notice that he organizes it around seven signs, 7 miracles, 7 big things that Jesus did to help us know who he really was. And today we're looking at the 6th of those signs. Last week, Sean took us through and we looked at the feeding of the 5,000, which was a pretty crazy miracle. And then right after that, Jesus walked on water out to his disciples who were in the midst of a raging storm, and he brought them peace in the midst of that. And this week, by the way, Jesus is back down at the temple in Jerusalem. I've said this before that, if you've read this story, you'll notice that Jesus is seesawing between the northern and the southern part of Israel, that every other week he's down in Jerusalem, and then he's back up near the Sea of Galilee, and he's back down in Jerusalem. And like I said before, whenever Jesus goes to Jerusalem, trouble erupts. Whenever Jesus goes to the temple, the religious leaders come out, and they're like, let's do this. Let's fight. Come on. And they'll poke at him and pick on him and start some kind of drama. And this time is no different. In John chapter 10, the religious leaders come up to him and they ask him a question that they've been dying to ask. In verse 24, they say, hey, Jesus, how long are you going to leave us hanging? How long are you going to leave us in suspense? If you really are the Messiah, just tell us plainly, right now. And in verse 25, Jesus answered him. He said, I did tell you. I've told you over and over, but you do not believe me. In fact, I've done some things, and those works that I have done, I'm doing in my Father's name, and they testify to who I am. And Jesus is basically saying, not only have I told you who I am, I've showed you proof. I've given you proof after proof after proof, but you keep refusing to believe. And this is odd because for most people, seeing is believing. When you see something, then you can believe it. But these people are not. For some people, seeing isn't enough. And you know people like this who basically have a blindness on purpose. They are willfully blind to the reality of God in their lives because they don't want to believe. Right? We all know people like that there may be proof sitting right in front of them. God is doing his thing, and it's right there, but they refuse to acknowledge it because they don't want to believe. Why? Because it might mean that they have to change their lifestyle. They might have to course correct. They might have to, maybe like the religious leaders, they might have to give up some of their power and some of their prestige and some of their position and their popularity. And that's why these guys were against Jesus and why they did not want to believe, because they knew they would be down the road if he was who he said he was, and they acknowledged that. But here's the thing, Jesus performed all of his miracles out in the open so that everyone could see and so that there would be no question about who he really was. And John is telling about those stories with us. Now, this is interesting. Jesus' time is coming to the end. We're getting closer to the end of this book, and we know that his ministry is about to come to end, and Jesus decides to go full tilt. He is going to turn the world upside down today. He performs a sign today that would cement his legacy once and for all. And it sets the stage for what you and I are celebrating next week and for what's going to happen next week. He's setting the stage for that. This week, I don't know how else to put it, Jesus manufactures a sign. He builds this thing that's about to happen that would leave no doubt for those who saw it. Those who saw it went, oh man, that is indisputable. It was indisputable. What he does today, it was indisputable, even to those who were willfully blind, and it caused them to accept the fact that, at very least, you know what? I think he is who he said he is. I don't want to believe, but we have to. And it also foreshadows his ultimate goal. It gives us a glimpse into what Jesus really came to do here. And so John tells us what happens here in John chapter 11. And this is a story. I just need you to follow along. This will be a fun journey. And I'm not going to jump ahead. Some of you know where this story goes. Just stick with me because there's some things I think John tells us this story this way so that he can prove something to us that we need to know. John chapter 11 verse 1 says this. Now a man named Lazarus was sick. He was from a town called Bethany, which happened to be the village of Mary and her sister Martha, who John had talked about before, these two sisters. FYI, Bethany is a real town. It's still there. I've been there. It is about a day and a half walk from Jerusalem. It is up on the other side of the Mount of Olives. If you're on the temple and you're looking south, you'll see the valley, Kidron Valley, and you'll see the Mount of Olives. And then on the other side of that hill, on the way down to Jericho and down to the Jordan River, is a village named Bethany. And Mary and Martha and her brother Lazarus, their brother Lazarus, lived there, and they were friends with Jesus. And Jesus often stopped there on his way to Jerusalem Jerusalem and hang out with these people. Verse 3, John tells us that the sisters sent word to Jesus, who was in Jerusalem, and said, hey, Lord, the one that you love is sick. Jesus is getting some bad news here, that his good friend, Lazarus, is sick. In fact, he's such a good friend that the sisters don't even mention him by name, because they knew that Jesus would know who they meant if they just said, the one that you love, the one that you really love is sick. In other words, come quickly. And so here's the interesting thing. Jesus' response to this news is remarkable. In verse 4, John tells us that when Jesus heard this news, he made this statement. He says, this sickness will not end in death. Now, I don't know how he said it. I don't know the tone of voice. I don't know if he's, took a staff and went, this sickness shall not end in death. Kind of like the Lord of the Rings. I don't know if he did it that way or if he just said, this isn't going to end badly. This is going to be okay, guys. Don't worry. I don't know. But he said this sickness will not end in death. But what makes this so remarkable is that by the time the messenger got to Jesus and his disciples, Lazarus was already dead. He's already gone. And Lazarus had died while the messenger was on the way. And Jesus knew this when he said this statement. He knew it. But Jesus says, this sickness will not end in death. And in verse 4, he goes on. He says, no, this sickness is for God's glory. Yeah, this sickness is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it. Now, if you didn't know this story and you were hearing this for the first time, you might go, wait a second, wait, what's happening here? Did Jesus just say that this sickness is for God's glory? That this sickness and this death is a good thing? It's for God's glory? To which I think John would say, exactly, you're on track. Jesus said that. Someone is deathly ill, and it's for God's glory. This is crazy. Jesus has just created a brand new category for disease and sickness. It is sickness for the glory of God. Who would like some of that? I want to be sick for God's glory. No, none of us. And in other words, John is saying that Lazarus was sick so that God's Son could become more famous. Now, I don't know about you, but that bothers me. I don't like that. That upsets me to think about it. To think that God might allow someone to get sick and even die so that God could reveal his glory and his goodness. I don't know. I'm just saying that makes me uncomfortable. I don't like that idea. Any of you feel that way a little bit? Oh, you're holy. You don't ever have those thoughts. Okay. I think that as John is writing this portion, he recognizes the awkwardness of this thought. He recognizes the uncomfortableness, and so he inserts himself into the story and he makes a comment. He's telling us the narrative, and he stops and goes, oh, by the way, I need to tell you something, because if I don't tell you this, you might just close the book and say you're out and quit reading. But stick with me. In verse 5, John gives us this little slice of information that's just out of order. It's crazy. He goes, oh, by the way, Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. Now, why does John have to tell us that? Well, because it doesn't look like he loves them very much. He just heard that his friend is sick and he's doing nothing about it. He knows that his friend is dead and he's not doing anything about it. And I think John is like, I know that what Jesus is doing here is kind of confusing. But you got to believe me when I tell you, Jesus actually loved these people. He really did. And I think John would say same thing to us. He's like, I know that sometimes it doesn't look like Jesus loves you either. That you're sitting there and you're in the midst of a trial, you're praying God, and nothing. You're brass, and you're like, where are you, God? And it looks like he doesn't care about you either, right? But John would say, listen, Jesus is putting this little sign together. He's manufacturing this sign so that you and I could know that we know that God, in fact, does actually love us, even when bad things are happening to us. And so to make matters worse, John says this, that in verse 6, he says that when Jesus heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed right where he was for 2 more days. He doesn't move, which had to be kind of surprising to his disciples, because they'd seen Jesus heal dozens of people, dozens of strangers before, and they had to look at this and go, why wouldn't Jesus get up now and go and heal Lazarus, his good friend? He just stayed there, lounging around, hanging out, eating TV dinners, watching whatever. It's strange to them. They had to go, this is weird. But John is trying to set this up. He's letting us know that Jesus is up to something. He's doing some things that don't make sense because he's staging a sign with a clear purpose in mind, with a message for you and I 2,000 years later to see. Verse 7, it says this, John says, finally, after 2 days of just sitting around, Jesus turned to his disciples and said, okay, let's go. Let's go back up over to Judea and let's go see Lazarus. He says, our friend, by the way, Lazarus, has fallen asleep, but I now want to go and wake him up. And I love this next part. The disciples decide to give Jesus some medical advice. They're like, wait, Lord. In verse 12, they said, Lord, if he sleeps, he'll get better. This sleeping thing is good. Leave him alone. Let him sleep. Sleeping's good. When a sick person sleeps, that helps the fever break. It's better this way, right? They're telling Jesus, the great physician, how to do this. And then John kind of lets us inside of their minds and lets us know what they're thinking. In verse 13, he says this, that they thought, or he's like, we thought, that when Jesus said that Lazarus was sleeping, that he was just simply resting. But what he meant was Lazarus had died. In fact, Jesus then plainly told us, he said, guys, you're not getting this. Lazarus is dead. Lazarus is dead. And as that isn't as bad enough, what Jesus then says next is horrible. It sounds cruel. It's cruel and it's horrible for Mary, and it was horrible for Martha, and it was horrible for Lazarus. But it's actually wonderful for us. What Jesus says next was bad for those three, but it was wonderful news for us and for anyone and for everyone who would ever one day read John's gospel like we are today. Jesus says this. It's horrible to them, but it's wonderful. He says, Lazarus is dead. And for your sake, I'm glad that I wasn't there to save him. Now, that's horrible for Lazarus and Mary and Martha. But this is wonderful. In other words, Jesus is saying to his disciples, it's for your sake that I didn't go and save Lazarus. And I would say that he's saying the same thing to us today. It is for your sake, and it is for my sake, that Jesus wasn't there to save Lazarus when Lazarus died. I'll go a step further. I believe it was for the sake of every parent who's ever lost a child that Jesus wasn't there to save Lazarus. I believe that. You'll understand why in a moment. But I believe that Jesus did this for every parent who has ever lost a child and has experienced that pain. I believe that it was for the sake of every wife who's ever lost her husband and had to bury her husband, or every husband who's ever had to bury their wife. I believe it was for the sake of every child who's ever had to bury a parent way too early, right? I believe it was for the sake of anyone who has ever buried anyone, that Jesus wasn't there to save Lazarus. Why? Because Jesus is manufacturing this sign for all of us, for any of us who ever gone through that pain and that kind of disappointment. He's doing it for that. It was for our sake that Jesus wasn't there in time. It was for those of us who ask that question, that have a hard time to reconcile the idea of a good God with such an evil world, and are going, how does that work together? And the answer to that question is in verse 15. And Jesus tells us why. He says this. He says, Lazarus is dead, and for your sake, I am glad I was not there, so that you can believe. So that you can have hope when it doesn't look like there's any hope. So that you can have hope, that you may believe. In other words, Jesus said, I've allowed, yes, I have allowed something terrible and something horrible and something hard and sad to happen to some people so that something good might happen. Now, the disciples hear this, like many of us, and they have a hard time wrapping their minds around it. And so Jesus is like, okay, let's go see him. Let's go to him. Let's go to Lazarus. And so flash forward about a day and a half walk from Jerusalem to Bethany, and they get there. In verse 17, it says this: upon his arrival, Jesus found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. I believe that is intentional. Back then, you may not know this, but there was a superstition that basically said that a soul would stay with its dead body for 3 days in the hope that it might be able to return and enter back. This wasn't scripture. This wasn't the Bible. It was a thought that kind of gotten widely passed around and believed. And so most families, when someone died, they left the body in their house for 3 days in the hope that maybe that they would come back. And then if they didn't, they would bury. But it's interesting, Jesus didn't get in there until the 4th day, which I believe is on purpose. He wanted everyone to know that Lazarus was dead and gone by then, and that this situation was hopeless. It was over. And when Martha shows up, one of the sisters, and sees Jesus, she testifies to this. Martha heard that Jesus was coming to town. She ran out to meet him. And look at what she says to him first. Not hi, hello. She's like, Lord, if you had only been here, my brother wouldn't have died. You should have where have you been? You should have been here sooner. But it's too late now because he's gone. Thanks a lot. Right? I mean, you can hear the disappointment in her voice there. And it's possible that maybe you've said the same thing to God before. Someone died in your life. Something tragic happened in your life, and you're like, what's up? Where are you? Where you been? I mean, if you had just been here, if you had just done this, Grandma wouldn't have died. Or my cousin, or my brother, or if you had just done this, my marriage would have been saved if this and this and this. You may have said the same thing. And John is putting this in there to get us triggered. To trigger every one of us who have felt, what's going on with you, man? Why? So that we can feel the impact of what he's about to do. Verse 22, Martha says this. She says, but I'll back down. I know that even now, God will give you whatever you ask. I think she said it under her breath. Maybe God will do whatever you ask. She's trying to cling to whatever shred of faith that she has left in Jesus. And here's the interesting thing. Jesus always responds to faith. In verse 23, Jesus said to her, Martha, your brother will rise again. Your brother is going to rise again. Now, I think Martha interprets this as Jesus going into preacher mode. You know what preacher mode is? People preach to you. You're going through a difficult time. You're in a crisis. And your friends, out of good heart, just come to you. And they just want to preach to you, maybe give you a little verse to try to make you feel better what you're going through. You're like, I know it's really tough, but the Bible says this. And you just go, oh, thank you very much. That's nice of you. Thank you. Appreciate it. But I'm in a crisis right now, man. I lost someone I love. I don't want the Bible. I don't want a sermon. I want my brother. I want that one that I lost back. That's what I want, and that's the only thing that's going to make me feel better. And so Martha kind of placates Jesus in verse 24. She answers him. She goes, I know. Jesus is like, your brother will rise again. She says, I know. He'll rise again in the resurrection on the last day. But that's not today. I would rather it be today. Now, what Jesus says and does next is breathtaking. And if you've read this story, you might yawn. Oh, yeah, I know what's going to happen. But man, we miss how powerful this is because we weren't there. Now, John was there, and he saw it. And he's trying to relay to us something that will shake us and to get us. And so we didn't see or hear what happened. But what Jesus does is breathtaking. He looks at her, and I believe he smiles at her. And then I believe that he kind of looks over towards Lazarus' tomb. And then he says to her, hey, she just said, I believe he'll rise again on the last day in the resurrection. Jesus then says to her, I'm the resurrection and the life. I'm the resurrection and the life. The resurrection isn't an event that will happen someday. The resurrection is a person. It's who I am. It's what I do. I can't help myself. I bring dead things back to life. I bring hope to hopeless situations. It's who I am. Jesus is saying, listen, Martha, I'm not here to give you a sermon or to mess with your theology. What I want to do is I want to show you something about God that you've forgotten or you don't know at all. I want to show you something about God. And that is this, is that this world is broken and it is evil and it specializes in giving us death. But I specialize in giving life. Everywhere I go, dead things come back. I specialize in life. It's all I can do because I am the resurrection and the life. And he then says this, whoever believes in me, whoever trusts in me, whoever follows me will live even if they die. They may die, but they will live again. And whoever lives by believing in me, they will never die. Weird little tongue twister there. And then he looks at her, and I think he sees the confusion and the pain, and so he asks her a question. And he, by proxy, he's asking us the same question. He goes, do you believe that? I know that's a lot to believe, but do you believe that those who believe in me will live again? Do you believe that? I know it's a lot. I know it's a lot to believe in. And Martha, to her credit, she musters all of the faith that she can get. And she's like, yeah, I guess. I mean, I don't really understand what's happening. I don't understand how this all works. And I will tell you this, I don't even understand why you're late. You should have been here, man. Did I mention that? But then she says, but here's the thing. I don't have to understand how everything works in this deal in order to believe in you. I don't have to know how it all works in order to believe in you. And she says it in verse 27. She says, I believe this, that you are the Messiah. You are the one that we've been waiting 1,500 years for. And I believe that you are God in a bod who has come down to this evil world. And then she drops the mic, and John says that she runs back down to the house and tells Mary, Jesus is here, as if I think something's about to happen. You need to go see him. And so John tells us that Mary then runs out to Jesus and that she's tear-filled, and they have a similar conversation. And I'm not going to take you through the conversation because here's the thing. John is giving us every detail. He's writing everything down because something incredible is about to happen, and he doesn't want us to miss a piece of it. I mean, it's like in his mind as he's writing this down, I imagine it's kind of slow motion. He like sees Martha run down the hill, and then he sees Mary come running up, and she's crying, and then he looks at Jesus. In fact, he says this, John says this, that when Jesus saw Mary weeping, he became deeply moved in spirit and troubled. In other words, there was a physical reaction when he saw Mary cry. And I wish I could portray it to you because Jesus was such a man of passion. I can't even begin to think, but I think he just... Is that possible? That God in a bod could have that kind of reaction to this girl who comes crying to him about, and he's like, he's moved in spirit and trouble. And then Jesus said, where is he? Where have you laid him? I've got to go to him. And they said, come and see, we'll show you. And finally, after several days, Jesus arrives at the tomb of his friend who has died. And he's clearly overwhelmed with emotion and the moment. And then John writes this. It's fascinating. John writes what would eventually become known as the shortest verse in the Bible. It's just 2 words. I learned in grammar school that to have a sentence, you have to have a noun and a verb. You have to have someone or something doing something. And that's what we have here in John chapter 11, verse 35. Jesus wept. Jesus cried. Jesus, the Son of God, cried. Jesus, God in a bod, creator of the universe, cried. What in the world could make the creator of the universe cry? What would make him cry? Well, I'll tell you this. It wasn't that Lazarus had died, because Jesus knew that wasn't how it was going to end. He said it. So it wasn't that Lazarus had died. It must have been something else. Oh, what was it? It was when he saw Mary cry. I believe our God cries when he sees us cry. He's a father. He loves us. And when his children are brokenhearted, he's brokenhearted. I believe that one verse tells us more about God's heart than maybe the rest of the Bible combined. You want to memorize a verse? You want to know who God is? Jesus wept. God cries when we cry. Verse 36 says everybody was impressed by this. John says that the Jews that had gathered around the tomb looked at him and said, look how he loved Lazarus. He's brokenhearted about that. But they didn't even understand what was going on. But some of them, some of the skeptics said, well, what's going on here? I mean, could not this man who opened the eyes of the blind have kept this man from dying? What's the deal, right? I mean, there's that question again that we asked at the beginning. God, why would a good God allow bad things to happen? I mean, why didn't you do something? You could have, you should have, right? I mean, if he could have healed him, he should have healed him. And if he didn't heal them, then maybe he can't. Or maybe he won't, he's just bad God. That's what they're thinking. But the truth is that Jesus could have healed him. He healed lots of people, but he didn't heal him, and he chose not to. Why? Because Jesus chose to do something better than just heal him. He chose to do something bigger. Why? For your sake and for my sake. He did something bigger. Jesus, it's interesting, Jesus condensed all of eternity down into the span of one single afternoon. Jesus took all of mankind's pain that every person has ever felt. He took all of mankind's pain and disappointments and fears and anger and unanswered prayers and tears galore, and he condensed them all into this moment. Why? So that future generations like you and I could live with hope. That when bad things happen in our life, we don't have to believe that that's it. That we could go, maybe tomorrow will get better. When some of us look down the black hole of our lives and the troubles that we cause ourselves, we don't go, well, maybe I just ought to check out. We go, wait a second. God might be doing something here. God might be doing something bigger. Because that's the kind of God he is, that when there is no hope, there's still hope in him. And so in verse 38, it says this, that then Jesus, once again, visibly, deeply moved, comes to the tomb. And he says, move this stone out of the way. And Martha interrupts. She's like, Lord, I don't know if I would do that. Man, by this time, it's going to be a bad odor. He's been in there 4 days. And then Jesus says something to her again. He's like, Martha, I don't think he's scolding her. He's like, didn't I tell you that if you will just believe, if you will just trust me, if you will just roll with me for a little bit here, you will see the glory of God. You will see something that you never imagined. Stick with me, babe. Which is the point of this whole story, by the way. Jesus, let's just break it down in simple terms for a third grader. Jesus allowed his friend to die, and he allowed his friends to experience deep sadness and grief. Why? So that he could show us his glory and his goodness and his power. And that we might believe, even when there's not much to hold on to. And so the rest of the story plays out like a movie. It goes quickly, except John says that this actually happened. It's not fake. Verse 41, it says this. So they moved the stone out of the way. And then Jesus then looked up to heaven and he said, Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I know that you always hear me, but I'm saying this for the benefit of the people that are standing here so that they may know and may believe that you and I are one, that you sent me. And after Jesus said this, he then called out in a loud voice. He said, Lazarus, come out. And then verse 44 is one of the craziest lines in the whole Bible. You've read this, but read it slowly. Listen to what it says. It says this. And the dead man walked out of the grave. And the man who was dead walked out. His hands and his feet were wrapped with strips of linen, and there was a cloth wrapped around his face, very gruesome and scary looking. And so Jesus is like, hey, take that stuff off of him and let him go because he is not dead. Jesus brought his friend back from the dead after 4 days in the grave. It's without a doubt one of the greatest miracles that Jesus had done up to that point. And then John concludes this story of the sixth sign with this line. He says this, and because of this, and because Jesus allowed his friend to be sick, and he allowed his friend to die of that sickness, and because he raised his friend back from the dead, many of the Jews and many of the people who had come out from the city, who had come to visit Mary and had seen what Jesus did, they believed in him. Their lives were changed. A hope got injected into their heart that they would never lose because they saw something that freaked them out, that was beyond comprehension. And it changed everything. And it was such indisputable proof. I mean, it was so big that even Jesus' opponents, they called a meeting. Those who were intimidated, they called a meeting and they decided, we got to kill him. They're going to try to kill the resurrection of life. We got to kill him, and we got to kill Lazarus. We got to get rid of the evidence, because they said this: if we let him go on like this, the whole world is going to end up believing it. If the rest of the world saw what we just saw, everyone will believe in him. And here's the thing, they weren't wrong. People freaked out. A few days later, thousands of people who had heard about Lazarus and what Jesus had done in Bethany, they came out and they welcomed Jesus with shouts of joy, and they were waving palm branches as Jesus walked down the Mount of Olives into Jerusalem for the final Passover. It was this massive celebration. The entire city, thousands of people gathered along this path as Jesus came down over the Mount of Olives on the back of a donkey. He's just riding a little donkey. He might have not been jiggling as much as I am, but he's riding that little donkey coming down. And he comes down, and it was just a huge celebration. But don't miss this. In less than a week, everything changed. Big celebration. Woo, woo, woo. And in less than a week, Jesus would be arrested. He would be tried and crucified as a criminal. And his dead body would be wrapped in grave clothes, and he would be buried in a tomb. And Jesus predicted all of it. He told his disciples these things would happen. In fact, in John chapter 3, verse 19, Jesus cryptically said this. He said, God's light, God's goodness came into this world, but people in this world love darkness more than the light. And why? Because their actions and their hearts were evil. That there's evil in this world. But that didn't stop me from coming, right? And so the question that we started with at the beginning of this is, why would a good God allow bad things to happen in this world? And the answer is, it's a little uneven, and that is that God's goodness and evil in this world have always coexisted. I mean, ever since the fall in the Garden of Eden, this place has been broken and evil's taken over and bad things happen. And so they've always coexisted. And we're always going to deal with that. There's always going to be people doing bad things out of their heart to hurt other people. And we are going to do bad things in our heart to hurt other people. And so evil exists, even though, but here's the thing. When God came to earth as Jesus, he did not eliminate evil. He didn't wipe it out. Instead, he covered it up. He paid for it. He paid for it. He took the evil that you've done and the evil that I've done, and he placed it on his back, and he carried it up a hill called Golgotha, and then he nailed all of it to a cross. Jesus paid the penalty for all the evil and all the sin in this world. And while you and I are still in this world, evil and sin is going to affect us. We are going to lose people tragically. We are going to have bad things happen in this world. But that's not the end of the story. We don't have to fret. We know there's more. Because it's like what John said in his book. He said, I have written these things so that you can have hope. That when bad things happen, there's still a good God, and good things can happen. You may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing in him, you may still live a life of hope and joy and peace in his name. You may have eternal life. You may have a perfect life. You may have a life a Jesus kind of life if you will just believe and trust in him. Man, I love this. Thank God for Jesus, or we would be so confused. We'd be so lost. And so today, I want to take a moment, since it is Palm Sunday, and I want to let you remember this. We take communion together often. On the night that Jesus was arrested, he turned to his disciples and he said, hey, I'm going to do some stuff in the next couple of days. I don't want you to forget it. And to help you remember, I want you every now and then, I want you to get together and do this. I want you to take a loaf of bread and I want you to break it. And I want you to remember that like that loaf of bread being broken, my body was broken for you. And I want you to take this cup, and this cup, I want you to understand, I want you to drink the cup because this cup represents my blood. The old covenant was a conditional deal. If you can follow the 10 Commandments, then you're good with God. This new one is that because of my blood being shed, you're good with God. I'll do it for you. You can't be perfect. But I was. And my blood was shed so you can have a relationship with God and experience peace and hope. And I want you to take that cup and remember that so that you don't get super religious and try to, be perfect all the time, and just that you rest in that and that you share this news with your friends and let them know that God has made an offer that they can't refuse. And so we are told as a church to do this as often, and we do. And so today, in a moment, I want to invite you, if you have put your faith in Christ, if you've put your trust and you decided to follow him, or if today you're like, you know what, I didn't know this. I didn't know that about it. I'm in. Sign me up. What do I got? Yeah, I'll believe. If that's all it takes, I'll trust that Jesus is better and bigger than anything I'll face. If you'd like to do that, I want to invite you to come to one of these tables and to take the bread and the cup back to your seat. And I want you to just, in your seat by yourself or maybe with a friend, to just kind of remember what Jesus did for you on the cross, that he squared you away with God. And then you can eat the bread and the cup at any point that you want whenever you're ready. Okay? You're welcome to come and celebrate the Lord's Supper together. Amen.